Mm, My first question to you is, why is it so difficult for the average individual to change?
Well, the main thing is that the brain is a very power hungry organ. It uses 25% of the energy of the body. And once it gets a fixed neural pattern, it's easier to just do what it's always done. So to change it, that takes a lot of effort. I tell people it's kind of like walking through a new field that has long grass. At first, it's hard to get through that grass. But if you keep going there every day and that's a shortcut to the store, pretty soon you're running down that path really easily. That's kind of how it works. So the old neurons, think about it, all behaviors first create neural networks. And just as a good example, what I like to tell people is languages. Do you speak two languages, Brody?
See.
Okay. So with two languages, you have a network in your brain that never shut off. In my case, before I was 7, I only learned one. So when I went to college to learn Spanish, it was very difficult. But for instance, our science officer speaks 6 languages. He went to India with me last year. By the time we were done with the 20-day trip, he was speaking Hindi
Wow.
because the brain literally absorbs languages if that circuit is active. If it isn't, then we have to learn the old fashioned way, and it's not very good. And that's why people can take 4 years in college and still not speak the language because it's all neural patterning.
That makes so much sense. And our brain's such a energy consumer, and if you don't have those pathways, if you're not in trained for them, it makes it more difficult. As far as Braintap goes, what you had the idea originally in your mind's eye, and you um, eventually down the road it manifests into physical reality. But what was like the process for you, like creating something as grand scale as that?
Well, it started actually back in the 80s when I was introduced to a bigger machine that you had to run by hand. It was about the size of what would be a microwave. And we were looking at biofeedback markers like breathing, respiration, heartbeat, things of that nature. And we would monitor and then we would adjust it by hand. So it took a practitioner. So it was more like we didn't have neurofeedback back then. So, but when they came out with the computer chip called the EEPROM chip, we actually were able to take what I was doing, mentally, and we found there was a certain protocol to get people to move from being awake to being in a state of alpha. And then we found out that that was just with sound. And then we found out when we started including light, we could get them into theta. And then so we started to create an algorithm. Now over time, what happened with Braintap was we went from just having, to show you an example, this is just a pair of eyeglasses. This is a prototype old unit. And this is just the glasses part. So we used to just have the glasses and you'd wear your own earphones. But then we're always looking for improved nervous system function. So how can we do that? Well, it has to do with energy, and we need to get more energy into the brain. In order to change, we need ATP production at the level of the brain. So when I was thinking, what can we do? Our doctors use lasers all the time in
Mm-hmm.
the ears and the meridian points. So I thought, wow, how could we get the same joules of energy, but through low level light therapy? So you wouldn't have to have a practitioner holding it.
Wow.
So we started to experiment. And what we found out, the math works out that the 9 LEDs create as many joules of energy as a 2-minute laser dose. Of course,
Hmm.
it's not as strong, so it's not going to hurt the ear, but we now can do it in 2. So now through something called photobiomodulation, we can deliver light into the brain because the ears, actually, the blood flow through the ears, not only is it slower, so it can absorb more of the light into the hemoglobin. It actually goes, that's how the brain regulates its temperature. It can take blood from there. So we're delivering that light, and that's the same thing we do at the in the eyes. So we're always looking, how can we mimic nature? So the eyes, when you think about it, the best example I can give is if you're sitting by the ocean and the waves are coming in, the light's dancing off the water, you're sitting there, you're going to actually naturally sink to alpha.
Mm.
And so, and another example is candles. Back in ancient times, even today, maybe somebody sitting today looking at a candle, they call it a jyoti meditation. And we know through science that that candle is actually flickering at 10 hertz frequency. And because our brain is literally always acting like a biofeedback tool.
It's
When
mimicking.
Yes, it's mimicking. So if you and I, Brody, were on a spaceship coming toward Earth, the earth would resonate between zero point 0.1 and 100 hertz frequency. So our brain does the same thing. So when we're in the mountains, it's going to resonate, let's say at the tree level, 7.8 hertz frequency. That happens to be theta. If we're
Mm-hmm.
at sea level by the ocean, 10 hertz frequency. If we're in the middle of San Francisco or New York City or Chicago or Miami or any other big city, we're going to be between 18 and 25 hertz frequency, where fear, frustration, and anxiety, that's the level, because they call it a phonetic pace. Some people, I tell people at Christmas time, do you like to go, like, be a stealth shopper and not be around when people are there? You try to miss the crowds. But some people, they don't want to go shopping unless they can get into all that energy. There's a lot of energy,
Right.
people buzz. Um, Myself, I love that, but my wife, no, not so much. So we kind of have to figure out when we're going to do that.
Yin
She'd
and
rather
yang.
go, yeah, she'd rather be like Elvis and get the store to open up just for her so she can walk through and go shopping.
I think I'm very similar in that sense. So essentially, our brain it adapts almost instantaneously to the environment.
Yeah, there's actually something I tell people: go to the internet and look at synchronizing metronomes. When you go there, it takes about 3 to 4 minutes to synchronize. They have a video there of about 200 metronomes. It takes about 3 to 4 minutes, but they also show that happens with grandfather clocks. So we know in our brain, every brain tap session, we take about 3 to 4 minutes, depending upon the session. It's all synchronization session. Because if we can get the hemispheres to sync, then that's where the magic happens. If the brain is out of sync, then it'll keep spiraling out of sync. To give an example, not sure where you're going to use this, but like for dementia or ADHD, what we find is the hemispheres are not in sync.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the left hemisphere is moving slower than the right. So we had to design specific sessions that speed up the left hemisphere, slow down the right. And it takes
Fascinating.
about 6 months for, I wouldn't say permanent, because nothing's permanent about the nervous system.
Sure.
But what they can do is then with 3 sessions a week, they can keep that tune up. So you can think about like tuning the brain.
Sure. Like a car. That's fascinating. Is that why we have there was those discoveries in the past about the brain and the left and right hemispheres? So like, oh, if you use your left brain, you're more mathematical. If you're right brain, you're creative. Is that where that came from?
Yeah, they now know that's kind of a misnomer, but it's
Right.
still it's true to some degree, because universally, even left-handed people use their right brain for creative thinking. So it's kind of like but what happens is that when we're under stress, one hemisphere typically shuts down, and it's our non-dominant one. So that's why doing things like martial arts or yoga, breathing techniques, those are some of the best neurological activities you can do to keep your brain tuned up. And what we find is they're all whole brain activities. But if you think about our school system, they give us a pin, and they say, which hand are you? And depending upon when I was in school, they finally had stopped, slapping people that were trying to write with their left hand. But,
Right.
it would have been better if they would have taught us to write with both hands and said Mondays is right hand, Tuesdays is left hand. There's actually a lot of books out there. When I would work with clients that were having anxiety and stress disorders, we would have them practice journaling with their opposite hand. And what would happen, because the problem with stress and dementia and all these other things is this miscommunication, just a millisecond. And a lot of people don't recognize this. They think their brain works like this. I think of a memory, I go back, I just go get it. That's not how it works. It lights up maybe 8 to 10 different places in the brain, then it reassembles it. And it's all happening at the speed of thought. It's so fast.
Very quick.
Just a nanosecond delay between the right hemisphere and the left, or the hippocampus. And this is what stress does. When stress restricts blood flow and circulation, those neurons don't have the energy, because the energy comes from the oxygen, the nutrients, the ATP production. So when you're under stress, you stop blood flow. So that means now you can't think. So we've all been to parties or gatherings where somebody says, "Hey, meet my friend here, Brody Miller," and then they go, "Okay," and then you walk up and they go, well, "What was his name?" Even though you had every intention of remembering it.
Right.
Under stress. Now, usually if you learn something under stress, you might have to get under stress in order to remember it. That's why in the military, when somebody says, why do they put them through all of those, like there's a movie actually you can watch online, How to Make a Marine. And That's why you have to be tested under fire, the crucible, like they say, and then when you get into those stressful situations, they call them state dependent memories. So
Mm-hmm.
many people don't have those state dependent memories. So they get into those situations. They literally do not know how to act, and our first response in our nervous system is to freeze.
Yes.
Every animal has a freeze response or they play dead, but if that happens too much, like it does for us humans today, we have so much stress we're under. This survivor brain is what I call it. When it turns on, we can get locked into that. We need to be able to switch those gears and get over to that, not just the thriving brain instead of the surviving brain.
That's brilliant. And is that where that negative voice derives from in our brain? Is that it's survival? I understand that, but I don't understand. Is there a
Right.
location of where this comes from, or?
Well, it's going to come from the occipital lobes. It's going to come from the alpha brainwave, because if you don't have a lot of alpha, you don't have self-talk, you don't have verbal talk. You might be able to think internally because we've done this with children that have autism. We work with a lot of speech pathologists. And once we increase their alpha up to being anywhere between 10 to 15% of their overall brainwaves during their awakened state, they start to speak. So but the self-talk might be more as a genetically learned or hereditary, and learned environment where they turn on those. Somebody says, my family's just negative. Well, that's a learned behavior, right?
Right.
We've learned those. But I think that it's unfortunate when you see children, you'll see some kids just born, they have like a propensity to be negative. And then you have other kids that have a propensity to be positive. But I think you can learn to be more optimistic. You have to be, and part of that is, I think, the upbringing and learning that it's okay to make a mistake. The only failure is to stop. The old Chinese proverb that says, success isn't succeeding every time, it's to get up after you fall. So if you're willing to get up and return to learning, then the brain will cast out those negatives and go to the positive. But some people, like I was brought up Catholic, so I was definitely programmed toward the negative. They told us every day what not to do, right? And then we went about doing it. That's how.
Yeah, you're gonna do the opposite.
Right. Our brain doesn't process negatives, right? That's called a double negative. When we say don't think of a dancing red elephant or a dancing pink elephant, we're going to think about it. So, or don't think of a stop sign. Start thinking about them. So I think a lot of times, because our news, when we turn on broadcast news, it's all negative. In fact, I was being interviewed in Tucson, Arizona once by a guy that started the All Positive News Network, and it didn't work. People wouldn't watch it.
It doesn't sell, I guess.
Yeah. And I said, why? What do you think was the failure? He goes, well, he said, just people are so driven by the negative that they want to see, they want to have the emotional pull or whatever. He said, and I said, well, what prompted you to do this? He said, we had a bus driver here in Tucson that saved the lives of 32 children. Her bus didn't fall off the cliff. She got them all off the bus. Then the bus went over the cliff. So all these kids would have been dead or injured or whatever. They never mentioned it on the news.
Wow.
And this teacher should have got an award,
Right. Yeah.
She risked her life and did all this. Now, if she would have somehow went off the road and killed all those kids, it would have been all over the news. Everybody in the world would have known about it. So, in the point that he was making was, there is so much more positive news out there, but it doesn't make our mainstream media news, because that doesn't sell newspapers or doesn't get viewer time.
It's almost, yeah, we choose not to focus upon that.
Right.
And on that note, what for somebody who's just starting out, meditation can be like a very intimidating word. So when I'm trying to convince clients to meditate, or I don't have another word for it. Hypnotism is very intimidating as well. So it's just trying to bridge that barrier.
Well, I think the main thing is that most people aren't aware that they are talking to themselves all day long, because it's kind of like you have this soundtrack going and it became wallpaper. It's still there. But when they start to quiet their mind, they start to hear that critical voice, and no one's trained them to change that voice into a more loving, supportive voice. It could be the voice of their dad or mother telling them how terrible they are, how stupid they are. But so one of the things we found, and this is what fascinated me when we started getting gear to actually measure brain activity and what happens in stress response, we have seen that at least 98% of the time when somebody's meditating, they're actually stressing their brain.
Hmm.
They're not relaxing, even though they go, I've been here for 10 minutes. I just don't like it. What's going on? Well, they have their monkey mind going.
Mm.
That's why I think that changing the terminology to mindfulness, in realizing that those thoughts, in fact, in the shaman's journey, there's I kind of think of what we're doing now as like digital shamanism, because what we're doing, they would teach people to go inside, make changes, and whatever the journey is, it shows up in the language that shows up. So go through that process. Don't try to resist it. There's a word that I like to tell people: let it happen. And the word "let" means in no way help or hinder the process. But once you clear out that voice, then you can get to that quietness that everyone's thinking. But the problem is that we're a fast food nation, right? We want it
Yes.
today. We don't want to spend 20 years on a mountaintop meditating. I don't want to learn a mudra. I don't want to know how to hold my hands. I don't want to sit cross-legged, but I want all the benefits that Buddha got,
Now.
spending 30 years. So that's where we got the Braintap, because we need to occupy. There's something called first attention and second attention. What I mean by that is, let's say you and I are having dinner at your favorite restaurant. We're having a great conversation. And then we hear somebody a couple of tables over say quantum university. Now, we didn't hear any of their other language, right? But that stuck out because we have a part of our brain called the reticular activating system. Our brain literally is taking in 25,000 pieces of information every second, but we only act on 40 of them. But that it's listening, because from our primitive brain, what if a bear or a tiger was sneaking up on us? We'd want to know, right? But just in the same way that if we're at a lecture and we can't hear the lecturer, right? But then we move our attention. Now we can see the lecture. Now we can hear them. Our eyes control 30% of our hearing.
Hmm.
So all of that information's coming in all the time. When we slow down, we start to get bombarded. We don't realize that all the information that we're processing, because we pretend we don't know. It's easier just to think that that we don't really have thoughts. A lot of people, once you start practicing and you start doing breathing techniques, you start focusing your awareness, then you start realizing that you can put those aside too. It's not that you're going to control them. You just put them aside. Yeah, those thoughts are there. No problem. Let them flow and let go. And I know that that's why we can measure that now, so we can show people, hey, you did good, but your brain's pretty stressed out now. Let's keep working on that. And then when you show them, because it's an internal thing, we don't have a meter in our brain that says, hey, we have 45% beta or whatever is going on.
Right. Yeah.
But what it shows up as anxiety and tension. And some people, they have so much kinetic energy that when they go to sit down, it's like electricity. It's like having an open wire on the ground. And
Is that like ADHD or something of that nature?
Yeah. And we're information. I mean, we're not science.
Right.
So all this information's there. So we always recommend you find some way to ground that energy. I mean, we measure people all the time. Like with this device here, it measures electronic smog, but it also measures resistance in the body. We can show people that they're running around with 3 volts of energy. I mean, that's a lot. We've had one person at 6 volts of energy they were running around with. We should be at 0 point. We should have no point energy. And
flat.
That's really infinite, because the vacuum of space is infinite energy if we could tap into it. The problem is that nobody's figured out a way to tap into it. But our body houses that. I mean, we have a quantum field, and that energy system is there, and it can be measured as resistance. That's where we're getting the voltage from. But if we're regulating right, like we're outside barefoot, we're taking in the ion effect, we're taking in what they might call forest bathing, all those things are going on. Our body is symbiotic with nature. But then when we isolate ourselves or we go into a home, and then our body doesn't have that, it doesn't connect the current. And
We're staring at a computer all day as well.
Yeah.
taking
Like
on the
if you came
frequency.
where I'm standing right now, I have a grounding mat I'm standing on. So even though I'm inside the house, my body is still, the ions are, I'm getting the ions from the earth and back like I'm standing outside. So we have to do things. I think technology is always going to find an answer. Somebody's going to get smart like Clint Oprah did with earthing and say, hey, everybody's not going to go outside like he does. He hangs around, he's almost barefoot all the time, like an Indian, or, you know, he kind of prides himself in that.
Right.
And so we have to find synthetic ways. Like there are sheets that you can buy. So it's like you're sleeping outside. So there's a lot of different technologies out there to do that.
A lot of stuff. Well, Patrick, I don't believe we had as much time, but it was a very fruitful conversation. I appreciate you getting on here with me.
Sure.
And
She said,
what's in store for Braintap?
well, we're still working on, we're always looking at ways to make our device better, stronger, and improve it. And we're doing a lot more with the neurofeedback world, biofeedback world. We're also doing a lot with coherency programs using virtual reality. So I think that I'm hoping that we can integrate that. So if somebody owns a virtual reality device, they don't need to buy our headset. They could just use their own. That's one of the things that we're going for now. And that's beyond my pay grade right now. But we have people that are working on that so that we can, all the technology's there. We just have to get it to work. So I think our goal, of course, is to better 1 billion brains so we can transform the world from the inside out. And I think that we're just going to stay true to that mission and continuing to help people improve their lives through their thoughts.
Cheers, my friend. I appreciate you.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care. Okay.